Welcome to my live teaching learning session of Principles of Macroeconomics BECC 133. Today is your sixth session of this paper. Today we will discuss about classical and Keynesian system of the economy. What assumptions classical economics gave and what assumptions Keynesian economics gave. What is Keynesian model and what is Keynesian theory? J.M. Keynes is known as the father of macroeconomics because macroeconomics was introduced at that time when when whole world was suffering from worldwide depression period. In classical model and Keynesian model, there is too much difference between these models. Classical model assumed that prices are fully flexible. It means prices can increase or decrease at any time. And wages are also assumed by classical economics fully flexible. It means wages can increase or decrease to stabilize the or to attain the equilibrium level of full employment. Economy can easily decrease or increase the wage rate level. Classical theory is totally based on long period assumption. As you know that Marshall has divided time period into three categories. One is very short period, which is known as market period. Second is short period, and third is long period. Very short period is that period in which supply can't increase, can't decrease. It means it can't be possible to change supply of any commodity in very short run or in market time period. Second time period, in short run, some factors are fixed and some factors remains variable. If we want to change the output level, then we can change only variable factor units, not fixed factor units. But long period is that time period in which all the factors of productions are fully flexible. So long period time period is assumed by classical model. And next assumption is classical theory determines LRAS. This LRAS represent long run aggregate supply, which remains always vertical or parallel to the y-axis curve. It means output remains constant and we can achieve full employment level in long run. According to Keynesian model, prices are rigid or wages are rigid. Rigid means wages are sticky or can't increase or decrease at any time. Same as prices can't increase or decrease at any time. Because if price increases, then there will be some causes behind that. If price decreases, then definitely there will be some causes. Without any cause, price can't increase or decrease. Keynesian model is based on short-run assumption. Keynes mainly assumed that our all problems mainly occur in short run because in long run we all will die. So problems mainly occur in short run. So we have to give solutions for the short run problems which occur in short period. Because in long period, nobody will live in this world. So problems are mainly related to short period. That's why Keynesian theory based upon short run model. And under Keynesian thoughts, aggregate demand determines the output level, not aggregate supply. According to Keynes, supply remains constant and supply curve is always 45-degree line. But according to classical model, supply is vertical, which remains parallel to the y-axis at the level of full employment. So this is the basic views of classical and Keynesian thoughts. Both views are very important in macroeconomics because we must have to know about what is classical theory and what is Keynesian theory. Keynes published his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, in 1936. And the worldwide depression period was 1929 to 1933. At that time, in USA and UK, both economies were suffering from depression. As we know that business cycles has four stages according to Schumpeter. One is boom, second is recession, third is depression, and fourth is recovery. In depression period mainly occur due to so many causes, but in UK and USA, the main cause of occurring depression period was deficiency of demand and excess of aggregate supply. At that time, USA and UK economy has had too much aggregate supply, but their demand was very less. That's why producers' profit motive start falling and they discourage to produce further output so that output level fall and fell down and unemployment arises. To solve this problem, Keynes gave his theory of employment, income, and interest and published his book in 1936. Keynesian model gets success to solve the problem of worldwide depression which was prevailing in which economies? USA and UK. That's why Keynesian contribution was considered more than classical contribution. So this is the basic difference between classical and Keynesian model. Next is classical economics was Malthus, Adam Smith, Ricardo, J.B. Say, J.S. Mill. These are known as classical economics. In classical economics, J.B. Say. J.B. Say was very famous because J.B. Say introduced the law of market. J.B. Say said that supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand means whatever goods and services are produced in the economy, immediately they are consumed by whole country people. It means there will be no problem of surplus and no problem of underproduction and no problem of overproduction will arise in the economy. When all the goods and services which are produced in the economy consumed by consumer, then no problem of underproduction or excess production will arise. So demand remains always equals to supply. It means there is no issue to arise depression or inflation or recession. It means increase in output. Whenever output increases, income will also increase. And And if income increases, spending will also increase. It means all will remain same. The same level of increase in output will generate the same level of increase in income and same level of increase in spending also. In this case, according to JBC, as every additional supply creates an additional demand, aggregate supply remains always equals to aggregate demand, and can be no general there can be no general overproduction and general employment problem occur. It means there will be no problem of underemployment or overemployment or overproduction and underproduction arise in the economy. So JB say give more emphasis on supply, but Keynesian thought gave more importance to aggregate demand. Because if demand will not occur in the economy, not create in the economy, then how producers can sell their output? So demand is very necessary. Demand play very important role in theory of employment, which was given by J. M. Keynes. But JB say give more emphasis on aggregate supply. He said that supply creates its own demand. It means every additional supply creates an additional demand. It means demand remains always equals to supply. If demand and supply both are equal, economy will be called static. No problem of overproduction, no problem of underproduction will arise in the economy. So this was the thought of J.B. Say, and his thought was known as law of market or Say's law of market. Next is classical theory of employment. What is classical theory of employment? Classical economics assumed that full employment always exists in each and every economy. What is full employment? Full employment is a level where all country people get employment opportunities. No one people is unemployed at the level of full employment according to classical thinkers. According to classical thinkers, under perfect competition, unemployment will be temporary and after some time it will disappear. Even at times, if full employment is not realized, then this will gradually move towards full employment. According to classical thinkers, full employment is a very simple and very general situation, and it can be achieved very easily. Classical thinkers assumed that full employment always exists in the free market economy or laissez-faire economy in which government interference is near about nil or nothing. If government does not interfere in any economic activity, then all economic activities or all functions of the economy can move smoothly. Classical economists don't realize the need of government. They assumed laissez-faire economy or invisible hand economy, in which government does not play any important role. So full employment is a situation where all country people get employment opportunities. But according to Keynes, full employment is not a general phenomena. It's not a very simple phenomena, and full employment can't be achieved very easily. At the level of full employment, 5 to 6% unemployment may be exist. That will be called natural rate of unemployment. Because in economy, so many types of unemployment exist. Sometimes cyclical unemployment occur. Cyclical unemployment occur due to wave-like fluctuations or business cycles. When boom situation occur in the economy, all country people will get employment opportunities. At the time of recession or depression, people will be unemployed. And after that, when recovery situation occur, then situation will move on in a better situation, and economy will get and reach the level of boom. At the boom period, full employment can exist. So, according to Keynes, at the level of full employment, 5 to 6% unemployment may exist. So, full employment is not a general phenomenon, and full employment can't be achieved very easily. At present, all the economies, either they are developed or underdeveloped, no one economy gets full employment level. All countries, all whole world is suffering from problem of unemployment. So unemployment, according to classical economics, is a very simple and very easy phenomena which can be achieved very easily, and full employment always exists in the free market economic system. But according to Keynes, full employment can't be achieved very easily, and at the level of full employment, 5 to 6% people may be unemployed, and they will be known as natural rate of unemployment. Next is classical theory of employment. What is classical theory of employment? We can show classical theory of employment with the help of diagram. As you know that classical theory of income and employment was introduced by classical economics like Adam Smith, Malthus, J.B. Say, J.S. Mill, Ricardo, etc. The entire economic premise of the classical economics was based on the assumption of full employment of labor and other economic resources. They were of the opinion that the economy operates in the stable equilibrium situation. It means economy always work in a static situation, in a static economy, exist in the whole world in the long run, and any deviation, if any variations or deviations there too was regarded as abnormal. It means normally economy will always operate in a stable equilibrium situation. And this stable equilibrium situation can be achieved with the help of demand and supply curve intersection. Here the curve is on x-axis we have taken labor employment, and on y-axis wage rate is written. How wage rate is determined? Wage rate can be determined with the help of demand of labor and supply of labor. Demand for labor curve is always downward sloping curve, which shows inverse relationship between wage rate and demand of the labor. Who demand labor? Mainly employer or entrepreneur or businessman who are engaged in business activities, they always demand for labor for production purpose. Demand for labor is always derived demand, not direct demand. Labor demand is always indirect demand. And demand for labor always inversely related with wage rate. If wage rate is higher, the demand for labor will be lower. If wage rate is lower, then demand for labor will be higher. That's why, due to this inverse relationship, demand for labor curve is always downward sloping from left to right. And supply of labor. Who supplied labor? Labor himself always supply his labor. So supply of labor curve is always upward sloping curve which shows direct and positive relationship between supply of labor and wage rate. Due to increase in wages, supply of labor will rise, and due to fall in wage, supply of labor will fall. So supply of labor curve is always upward sloping curve and demand for labor curve is always downward sloping curve. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined and this equilibrium point is called, here wage rate is W and the employment or employed labor numbering is N. This W divided by P0 is known as real wage because one wage is monetary wage and other is real wage. There is basic difference between real wage and monetary wages. Monetary wages are those wages which is received by the employee after rendering their services. But real wages may be higher or may be lower than monetary wages. It depends upon the price level of the economy. If price level increases, then our real wages or our purchasing power will fall. And if price level falls, then real wage or purchasing power of the people will rise. That's why if W is divided by P, that will be called real wage rate. So real wage rate mainly depends upon price level which is prevailing in our economy. If inflation occurs, real wage falls. If deflation occurs, real wage rises. So this is the determination of wage rate. Wage rate can be determined with the help of demand and supply curve intersection. Next is, according to classical model, demand and supply curve DL curve is always downward sloping curve and supply curve is always upward sloping curve. On x-axis labor is written and on y-axis real wage is written. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium wage rate is determined W0 and equilibrium number of labor is determined L0, and with the help of this diagram we can derive full employment level, and this output function shows that in the beginning output will increase, after that output will become maximum, and at last output start falling. This another curve which is derived from the first curve shows production function. Production function is the functional relationship between input and output. Inputs are mainly for land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. But the main producing factors are two. One is capital, other is labor. If we are taking two factors of production, then output will depends upon the input. So output can be denoted by Q and input can be denoted by function of K and L. Here K represent capital and L represent labor. So output is the function of input which is labor and capital. And output or production function curve always start from the origin. In the beginning, this output will rise as well as we increase the number of units of labor on fixed factor, production will rise. After that, production will become maximum and at last production will start falling. That's why this curve is always in the beginning upward, after that falls. Next is classical model. According to classical model, the nature of aggregate supply curve is always vertical line or parallel to the y-axis curve. And the nature of demand curve is always downward sloping curve. How full employment can be achieved? So, classical thinkers said that full employment can be achieved very easily because supply remains constant and supply, aggregate supply, which is vertical, it shows that full employment achieved in the economy. Beyond that, we can't go. It means beyond full employment, Unem- beyond full employment, employment will not increase, income will not increase, output will not increase, output remains constant, income will remain constant at the level of full employment. That's why aggregate supply is vertical. Either there rise in price level or fall in price level, supply will not change. That's why aggregate supply under classical model remains always vertical or parallel to the y-axis. Demand curve is always downward sloping curve which shows inverse relationship between demand and price. At higher price, demand will be lower, and at lower price, demand will be higher. Where aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve intersect each other, equilibrium price and equilibrium output level will be determined. And at this equilibrium point, economy will be at full employment level according to classical model. So this is the classical model from which we can determine full employment level and determine the equilibrium price also. Next, Keynesian. In previous slides, you have studied about classical model. And now Keynesian. Keynesian model. What is Keynesian economics? Keynesian economics was developed by J.M. Keynes. The full name of J.M. Keynes is John Maynard Keynes. And Keynesian economics was introduced or developed by J.M. Keynes at the time of Depression period. This period is known as Great Depression, 1930s. Keynesian theory provided an explanation for the severe and prolonged unemployment of the 1930s. As I have discussed with you that in USA and UK at the time of 1929, worldwide depression was prevailing in whole world, but the most affected countries were USA and UK. At the time of depression, near about 17 to 20% their population was unemployed at that time period. So unemployment is very biggest problem for all the world, and at that time Keynes provided his theory to explain how we can solve the problem of unemployment. And unemployment, as you know, that is the major issue of macroeconomics, because macroeconomics deals with whole units of the economy. That's why unemployment, if we solve this problem, we must have to take measures from which employment can generate and whole country people can get employment opportunities. Keynes argued that wages and prices are not flexible, they were highly inflexible, particularly in a downward direction. Thus, he did not think that any changes in price or any changes in wage rate or any changes in interest rate would direct the economy back to full employment. So, Keynes argued that wages and prices are in sticky nature or in rigid nature. They can't increase or decrease according to our willingness. So, national income, Keynes written his book in 1936. The book name was The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. So, the income and employment theory which was introduced by classical thinkers and Keynesian economics, in which national income is defined as the means of or the total money value of all the goods and services which are produced in an economy during an accounting year. And each and every country wants to achieve higher rate of national income, because if national income rises, then per capita income will rise, and due to rise in per capita income, standard of living of the country people will definitely rise. So Keynesian economics is mainly that economics which was introduced at the time of depression period, and Keynes gave great contribution in macroeconomics. According to Keynesian model, full employment is not a general situation. Full employment is a rare situation. It can't be achieved very easily. So we can achieve determination of income and output level with the help of aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve, but can't achieve full employment. According to Keynesian model, aggregate supply is not perfectly inelastic or vertical or parallel to the y-axis curve. According to Keynes, aggregate supply is flexible. It can change according to the change in price level. When price increases, supply will rise, and when price falls, supply will fall. There is a positive and direct relationship between aggregate supply and price level. That's why aggregate supply, or SRAS, which is known as short run aggregate supply curve, is always upward sloping curve, and demand curve same as downward sloping curve, which shows inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, where both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, price level will also determined and output level will also determined. So the basic difference between classical model and Keynesian model is the nature of supply curve. According to classical model, the nature of supply curve is vertical because classical thinkers assumed long period assumption. And in long period, prices are more flexible, but when we achieve full employment level, then no output, no income, and no employment will rise. Only price will rise. But according to Keynesian model, aggregate supply curve is upward sloping curve, which shows direct and positive relationship between price and supply. So the nature of supply curve is different from classical and Keynesian model. Next is the aggregate demand curve. What is aggregate demand and what is aggregate supply? We can define aggregate demand with the help of this definition, that aggregate demand is the total demand of all the country people, or aggregate demand curve represent consumers, investors, and government, or net export in an open economy demand. It means aggregate demand has four components. If we include only two components like C and I, C is consumption and I is investment. If we take only two components in aggregate demand, then it will be known as two sector economy. If we take or include three components in aggregate demand like C, I, and G, consumption demand plus investment demand plus government demand, then this demand will be called in a three sector economy demand. And if we include four sectors as a component of aggregate demand like consumption demand, investment demand, government demand, and net export demand, then this equation will be known as four sector economic equation, in which C plus I plus G plus NX. NX is net export, which is the difference between export and import. So aggregate demand curve represents in an open economy four components demand in which C plus I plus G plus NX is included. An aggregate demand curve is always downward sloping curve which shows inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Aggregate supply is the total supply of all the goods and services which are produced by the wholesaler or whole producers of the economy. Aggregate supply curve generally upward sloping curve which shows direct and positive relationship between price and supply. So aggregate supply curve represent the productive ability of the economy and it is generally upward sloping curve according to Keynesian model, but it will be vertical line or parallel to the y-axis curve according to classical thinkers. So simple model can be used to see how changes in the productive ability of the economy or the changes in consumption, investment, government expenditure, and taxation or international trade can affect the whole economy, GDP, unemployment, and inflation. The intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply represent the general equilibrium of the macroeconomy, which was presented by J.M. Keynes or Keynesian economics. In this diagram, short run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping curve and aggregate demand curve is downward sloping curve where both curves intersect each other. Price can be determined and real GDP or output level can be determined at the point of intersection. Our supply curve is upward sloping because it is based on short run assumption and short run assumption was assumed by Keynesian model. That's why SRAS, short run aggregate supply curve, is always upward sloping. But long run aggregate supply curve according to classical model remains always vertical. Next, comparison between classical and Keynes theories. As you have studied about what is classical model and what is Keynesian model, what type of assumptions classical and Keynesian economics assumed, which is related with theory of employment, interest and money. First of all, the basic difference between both thinkers was based on full employment. At the level of full employment, according to classical thinkers, the theory of classical economics assumed that economy can only be in a state of equilibrium at full employment level, and any deviation from full employment would be of short period. And Keynes theory is of the viewpoint that an economy can be in equilibrium even at less than full employment level. There is a small possibility of full employment in a country. It means, according to classical thinkers, full employment is a simple situation and it can be achieved very easily. But according to Keynes, full employment is a rare situation. It can't be achieved very easily and there is a very small possibility of full employment in a country. So this is the basic difference between classical and Keynesian theory. According to classical thinkers, full employment, general phenomena which exist in each and every economy if government don't interfere in an economic activity, and Keynes realized that government play very important role in each and every economy. That's why government should also play role in all countries to achieve the level of full employment. Without interference of the government, economic activities can't run smoothly. So, basic difference of classical and Keynesian assumptions was, one is classical thinkers' assumption was based on long period, and Keynesian theory's assumption was based on short period. Classical assumed that demand and supply remains always equal. There will be no problem of overproduction and underproduction will arise in the economy. But Keynes said that economy is dynamic, not a static. If economy is not static, then how can demand remains equals to supply? If demand remains always equals to supply, then no problem of overproduction and no business cycles occur in the economy. There will be no situation of boom, recession, depression, and recovery will arise. No inflation, no deflation situation will arise. But this all situation arises in all the economies because whole world is fully dynamic, not static. So demand can't remains always equals to supply according to Keynes. And it's realistic. Classical assumptions was based on unrealistic assumptions. That assumptions are not really exist in the economy. But Keynesian assumption exist in reality in the economy. That's why Keynesian theory is much better than classical theory. Next is, but some economists criticize the Keynesian theory of employment also, as we know that merits and demerits, coin has two sides, each pros and cons are always included. So we can criticize for some point of view Keynesian theory of employment also. One is the concept of equilibrium is self-contradictory. Economy equilibrium was possible in less than full employment level. According to Keynes, this assumption was assumed that economy equilibrium may be possible in less than full employment level. Many economists criticized this view of Keynes. According to them, equilibrium can be possible when there is full employment and in the employment and full utilization of resources. Other economists assumed that when full employment exists, then we can use all the available resources fully. And fully utilization of resources is possible at the time of full employment, and equilibrium always will be determined at that point where full employment will be achieved. Keynesian economic analysis is mainly a static analysis. He did not clarify that when we move from one position of equilibrium to the other, how and in what way investment undergoes a change. Keynes said that aggregate demand can increase or aggregate demand can decrease, and how we can move aggregate demand. He did not clarify when we move from one position of equilibrium to the other, how and in what way investment undergoes a change. It means how investment can change because in short run, consumption remains constant according to Keynesian theory. Then AD can move only with the help of increase in investment. Then how much investment will increase and how you can increase in investment without taking any advantages or without giving any benefits to the investor, or in what way investment can be affected. So these causes which are behind the increase in investment level can't explain by Keynes. That's why other economists criticized Keynesian theory or economic analysis which was given by Keynes. And third is Keynesian theory is based on short period or short run economic analysis, having no concerns with long period. It means the problems which mainly occur in long run can't be solved by Keynesian theory, because Keynesian theory is mainly based on short run assumption. So these are the main grounds on which Keynesian theory was criticized by other economists. But after studying this criticism, we can't deny that Keynesian contribution in macroeconomics is nothing. Keynesian contribution in macroeconomics is too much, or it's really very great contribution, because Keynes solved that the problem of depression period which mainly occur in USA and UK. Now next is models for income determination. How income can be determined in a two-sector economy, in a three-sector economy, and in a four-sector economy. How we can determine national income. As you know that national income is the sum total of all the goods and services which are produced by the normal resident of our country in an accounting year. National income can be determined in a two-sector economy in which only household and firm sector exist, in a three-sector economy in which household, firm, and government sector all included in three-sector economy, and in a four-sector model, household, firm sector, government sector, and rest of the world or external sector all are included in it. The equation of two-sector model is C plus I. The equation of three-sector model is C plus I plus G. And in the equation of four-sector model is C plus I plus G plus net export, or X minus M. Now, how we can determine the equilibrium level of income and output or employment by AD and AS approach according to the theory of income and employment. Here aggregate supply is 45-degree line, and aggregate demand is always start from the y-axis, because demand can never be zero, consumption can never be zero, and aggregate demand in a two-sector model, C plus I, the two components of aggregate demand is included in a two-sector economy. So this is the two-sector model where C and I are the component of AD, and demand is always start from the y-axis, not from the origin, because demand can never be zero. And aggregate supply is always a 45-degree line which shows direct and proportionate relationship between income and output. It means if income is zero, output will be zero, as well as income rises, output will rise. That's why aggregate supply is always 45-degree line. And we can't change this 45-degree line if we want to change in equilibrium point, and if we want to achieve full employment level, then we can change only aggregate demand curve, not aggregate supply curve. So where aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve intersect each other, then equilibrium will be determined, and here equilibrium point is E. At this point, national income, output or employment is determined. Y. OY is the equilibrium income, output or employment level, and E is the equilibrium point where aggregate demand and aggregate supply both are equal. So this approach can be used in a two-sector model economy. Next is we can derive saving and investment curve with the help of this in aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve intersection. In this diagram, write on x-axis income, output and employment, And in first diagram, write on y-axis aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve. Aggregate supply curve is 45-degree line, which shows direct and proportionate relationship between income and output. And aggregate demand curve is upward sloping line, and aggregate demand is always start from the y-axis, not from the origin, because demand can never be zero. Where demand and supply curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined. Here aggregate supply can be denoted by Y, and aggregate demand has two components in a two-sector economy, C and I. C shows consumption demand and I shows investment demand. E point is equilibrium, Y is equilibrium level of income. And if we join this line to another curve, and here we are taking saving and investment, and we can show national income determination with the help of two approaches. One is AD and AS approach, other is saving and investment approach. According to Keynes, investment is always considered as autonomous investment, which remains always constant or parallel to the x-axis. Saving curve is always start from the below point of the origin, because saving may be negative in the beginning, after that saving may be zero, and at last saving start rising. Where saving curve intersects investment curve, equilibrium point is determined and income level is also determined. So we can determine national income or output level with the help of two approaches. The first approach of equilibrium is known as aggregate expenditure approach or AD and AS approach. And second approach is known as saving and investment approach. Here both approaches are taken together and determine the level of income and output and equilibrium also. Next is aggregate expenditure. Aggregate expenditure is the sum of consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net export. Here C shows consumption expenditure, which are made by household sector. I is investment expenditure, which are made by firm sector for production of goods and services. G is government sector. Here government sector we include in this government expenditures. And next is export minus import, which is considered as net export. Here AE or Y is equal. We can write AE or Y because both are equal. AE represent planned spending or GDP represent actual spending. So AE is not the same as GDP, but sometimes we can write AE is equals to Y when aggregate supply curves start from the origin. So these are the components of aggregate demand or aggregate expenditure in a four-sector economy. This is the diagram of four-sector economy. One is here aggregate supply curve is drawn. Aggregate supply line is always 45-degree line. Next is consumption curve. Consumption curve always start from the y-axis because consumption can never be zero. And the equation of consumption is consumption function is equals to A plus BY. Here A is autonomous consumption and B represent marginal propensity to consume, which is the function of income. And the next line is if we include in aggregate demand C, I, G or NX, then this consumption curve will shift to the upward and aggregate demand curve where cuts aggregate supply curve, the equilibrium point will be determined, and at this equilibrium point, income level will also determine. So in a two-sector model, we take only in aggregate demand C plus I. In a three-sector model, we will take in aggregate demand C plus I plus D. And in a four-sector economy, we will take in aggregate demand C plus I plus G plus NX. But the nature of aggregate demand curve is always upward sloping curve, start from the y-axis, not from the origin. And aggregate supply curve will always start from the origin, and always it will be a 45-degree line, which represent the direct and proportionate relationship between income and output level. Next is Conclusion: the impact of any change in aggregate demand on output and the price level depends on the aggregate supply curve. In this chapter, you have studied about classical views and Keynesian views. Classical thinkers were mainly Adam Smith. Adam Smith is known as father of economics, who gave the first definition of economics as a wealth of nation. Adam Smith, Ricardo, the main famous theory of Ricardo is rent theory, and Malthus gave great contribution in population or demographic theory, and J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill or J.B. Say gives the law of market, and J.B. Say market law is very famous because Say's law of market said that supply always creates its own demand. It means first of all we have to produce goods and services. After that, demand will generate, and whatever demand will increase, as well as supply will also increase. It means demand and supply will remain always equal. There will be no problem of underproduction and no problem of overproduction will arise in the economy. That's why economy can achieve very easily full employment level according to classical approach. And if there is any disequilibrium situation occur in the economy, classical thinkers assumed that prices are more flexible in nature and wages are more flexible in nature. Saving depends upon the rate of interest level, and if we want to give more employment opportunities to the labor, we can decrease the wage rate. If we want to give less employment opportunities to the labor, we can increase the wage rate. It means wages are very flexible in nature. But at present, government has introduced minimum wage legislation law in which wages can't decrease at the minimum level which is fixed by the government. So according to Keynesian thought, wages are in rigid nature, wages are sticky, wages can't increase or decrease according to our willingness, and we can't change wage rate beyond the level of minimum wage rate or minimum wage legislation which is given by government. So according to Keynesian theory, wages are not flexible, prices are not flexible, and saving depends upon the level of income, not on the rate of interest. Because if our income is nil and interest rate is higher, then how we can save money? It means saving mainly depends upon the level of income, not to the rate of interest. But classical thinkers assume that saving depends upon the rate of interest. At higher rate of interest, people will save more, and at lower rate of interest, people will save less. But how is it possible? If the income of the country people is lower, if interest rate become higher, we can't save because saving depends upon the level of income which is set by J.M. Keynes. So J.M. Keynes assumptions are very realistic assumptions and exist in the economy, but classical thinkers assumption was unrealistic assumptions because they assume that full employment can be achieved very easily and economy work always in a static situation, and at present we know that economy is dynamic, everything is dynamic, everything is changeable. Then how can we assume that static assumptions will exist in our present economy or present situation? So where aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve intersect each other, equilibrium point can be determined. And this equilibrium is not static. Equilibrium can change if there is any change in demand occurs or if there is any change in supply occurs. Now this topic has been finished. Thank you.